Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Duncan Smart is no ordinary health voice, an international endurance athlete, and the force behind his two most recent books, Carnivore, the Manual, a real-world guide to meat-based living for carnivore, keto, and low-carb warriors, and Blood and Bone, the Vampire's Guide to Carnivore Living. Duncan wields metabolic science like a knife, carving through nutritional lies with ancestral fire. Known to readers as the Carnivore Vampire, Duncan fuses Slavic folklore, Mongol steppe wisdom, and Arctic survival rituals into a manifesto for the metabolically betrayed. His work is a rebellion against sickness, sedation, and the modern feedlot of dogma. He once walked the tame path, teacher, vegetarian, cog in the machine, until his body screamed for the truth. His return to flesh, fire, and fasting sparked a visceral transformation, gut sealed, mind cleared, mission forged. Duncan dissects dogma with academic precision from his base in North Yorkshire's wild moors, where he trains, writes, and helps others to rewild their biology. Through the concepts of meat as sacred fuel, movement as ancestral ritual, and metabolic fire as birthright. Duncan Smart, what an absolute honor just to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's such an honor to host you. Anybody listening or watching will know for sure 100% that those were your words in the introduction. Definitely not my words, because they're very eloquent and very passionate. I could never come up with something like that, even with the help of AI, if I ever used AI. So you're an amazing writer.
Well, thank you. While I was listening to it, I was thinking, that sounds familiar. Yeah, I'm like you mentioned, I'm a teacher, retired school teacher. I retired, 8 weeks ago now. It was at the start of the summer holidays. And I'm a mathematics teacher. I've taught mathematics for a long time. So a lot of people always say, well, where do you find these words from, being a mathematician? But I think it's because as a mathematician, we really study data. And so I'm drawn to the science side and the research. And then the words just flow when he's passionate about something.
Yeah. Well, it really comes forward. I have not gotten my hands on your book just yet. I've read some of the samples that have been available, and obviously you've talked a lot about it in other podcasts and other shows, and I can't wait to get it. And I know that those words shine through all of your work. I just heard amazing things. You've got so many amazing reviews of your book. And yeah, we're in an interesting spot, at least around me, here in like the Salt Lake Valley of Utah. It doesn't feel as weird to talk about what I do and how I live my life and how I'm a coach for other carnivores out there. I've been doing a carnivore diet for 6.5 years, and it just happened this weekend that I was at a barbecue, kind of a brunch with some of my clients and their friends, and they were asking me what I do. And I can say, like, I coach carnivores, and we had a great discussion where people were asking me questions about that and what is it like, and do people need fiber? And it doesn't feel like as weird as it used to be. Does it feel like it's gaining a little bit of traction and making progress where you are on the other side of the pond?
Without a shadow of doubt, this is a conversation I recently had as well. Although a lot of my conversations are now chatting through podcasts with the likes of yourself. So yeah, in my athletic world over here in the UK, it's pretty slow progress on that, and people look at me as though I'm some strange monster when I start to talk that I eat this way. And when the fact is fruit and vegetables and that I don't consume, this is where the idea of this mythical creature came from, for the vampire to be able to tell the story through the eyes of this mythical creature to see if they would believe me more. But just to answer your question, I mean, I started 7 years ago down this carnivore route. So very similar time to you, very similar indeed. Possibly keto to start with, just keeping the carbohydrates under 50 grams. And then after a while, you start to think, well, why not full carnivore? Why not cut those carbohydrates down to zero and just see what happens? And at the time, several years ago, I was out there on my own. I never thought about trying to find any groups there on social media or the likes, and I was just doing it by trial and error. A lot of my athletic colleagues said that I'd putting myself into an early grave, and they were quite concerned. One of my colleagues was willing to pay every year for a private blood work test, just to test to make sure I wasn't doing myself any harm. But he actually sat me down and says, "You realize a couple of years eating this way, you may do yourself so much harm. There's no going back." I said, well, from everything I've researched and I read and I strongly believe, then I'm prepared to take that step. And here we are today discussing it and on the back of my book.
That's amazing. I do want to go a little deeper into your own journey through health. We can start whenever you like, but I'm assuming you were kind of brought up in the low fat kind of movement dogma that we all kind of went through. Is that the case with you?
Yeah, very much so. I was born 1968 and 57 years of age. And I was on the back of where that point, the low fat really hadn't come into the UK. It tended to be, I think it was the mid 70s. And I was quite fortunate that my family were farmers. My grandparents were farmers. We got raw milk from the cow. I was drinking it warm in the morning. And my father was a hunter, so I got to eat really well. The milk was turned into butter, and so it was a pretty healthy start. Then mid 70s, but maybe perhaps a bit later, then my poor mother, and she's still annoyed with herself that she bought into this low fat story myth that we were sold, and started to buy the margarines, and the butter went out of the way, and it was the fact that we're drinking raw milk was terrible. We had to have semi-skim milk and low-fat milk, and going down all this route of more sugar, as we know, and down the actual fat, which was the healthy. But at least my early years had a pretty good basis then for a healthy way of living. And it was only until a lot later that your body starts to scream out to you, doesn't it? You get to that middle age. And I remember saying it to people as a 40-year-old man and saying, oh, this is what we're like when we're middle age. We are overweight. We've got a tie around our waist. My children are saying, come on, Dad, let's have a race. Oh, we don't run when we get this old. Because my father didn't when he was into his 40s. You just presume you're an old man, a middle-aged man. No concept that our life could be so different and so much better.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. We mentioned in the introduction that you had a stint in vegetarianism as well. Can you tell us about that?
I will, I'll go back to about 2011, 2012. I was a vegetarian for probably about 5 years, maybe just a little bit longer than 4 years. And it's because I'd gone back. I was an engineer. I'd worked in engineering for a long time. And I became a single parent with 3 children and decided I wanted to release my dream, which was to be a mathematics teacher. So it wasn't a big jump to go back to university to study to be a teacher on the back of my engineering and being a mathematician. And I think I jumped on board the vegetarian idea. I think it was a typical, stereotypical student lifestyle, being a vegetarian, and I actually felt healthier. But I tell people, I think it doesn't matter which route you take, as long as you're looking and focusing on what you're eating, then you tend to feel better for it. Oh, I could have just sold myself that narrative. And it was during this time as a vegetarian, as a student, I was really badly assaulted. I was hospitalized. I was over 90 stitches around my eye, and I always light everything from the right hand side now because I'm always conscious about the facial scarring. And it was after about a year or so, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is you're bound to after being hospitalized like that, and especially carrying the facial scars, and especially in teaching and then qualifying and looking at interviews, and straight away everybody's looking at you thinking you're a fighter because you've got facial scars. It could have been a pub fight or whatever. They just have this misconception that this is the case. So with this post-traumatic stress disorder, which I was diagnosed for, I was suggested I went for some therapy, and I went for the therapist, and the therapist suggested something called immersion therapy, which is you immerse yourself in what you fear. For me at the time, it was to be in crowded spaces. It was to be anywhere that there was glass because I'd had a bottle smashed into my face. And so after 8 weeks, she said, you're cured now. And before I sign you off, Duncan, how about thinking about some exercise? Because exercise would be really good for you. And I said, oh, no, I'm an 18 stone. Sorry, I don't know what that would be in pounds there, but I was a very heavy set man. And I said, I don't do an exercise. She says, what about running? So I thought, okay, I'll give this running a go. And there's an app called Couch to 5K, which you follow it. And by the end of the 8-week program, you can run 5K. Well, it was hard work, but I went through to the end of it. I got And I enjoyed the 5K, and then I started to do it a little bit more, and I got my daughter involved, and we went to the local park runs here in the UK, which had just started. And I was slow, but it didn't matter. It's not about speed. It's not about time. Then I joined a running club and ran a little bit more, but never been as fast as the others. And then the next thing people suggest is, how about running a marathon? Well, I never thought about this marathon, but it planted the seed. And so I started to do 10Ks, and maybe a half marathon was a maximum. But what I couldn't get over was always chasing that energy, that everybody was grabbing the gels and, oh, take a gel every 20 minutes and train your body to take as much carbohydrate as you can. And this because being a scientific mind, I kept thinking, this cannot be right. We can't just keep taking carbohydrates every 20 minutes and trying to carbohydrate load. And then I saw my colleagues that had intestinal issues as they were running. I mean, you'll have seen the videos there of marathon runners when they're having to run to the toilet at the side of the road and worse. And all the time I kept thinking, no, this is a bit of something can't be right with this, because our ancestors certainly won't have run that or won't have needed that sort of energy. They didn't have the energy gels. The times that people are running weren't much different to they were running 30, 40 years ago without these gels. So this is when it set me off on this route of discovery and starting to look at the ancestors, look at the tribal systems, look at the fueling, and then came across this idea about, do we really need carbohydrates for that energy source? And this is I kept it quiet to start with. I didn't even want to tell my children because they would have they'd been thinking, why is my dad suddenly going over to eating this high fat food? Well, it was like night and day. That energy system came with bounds. I felt good. Yes, it took a bit of adjustment. It took a while to adjust. I felt palpitations. I felt all those usual sort of telltale signs of what people go through, especially because of the way that I was. But I also felt good losing the weight. And with losing the weight, I got a little faster. But what came to me was that endurance. That endurance was unbelievable. So, I mean, maybe it was a year. One regret there, Casey, is that I never documented all this. I should have kept a journal. It'd have been a book in itself with that journal. But because I was experimenting and just trying it and not knowing how this would work, because I didn't have a lot of support system, or I certainly hadn't found any support system on this. I didn't know if it was going to be long term. So one day I woke up and I thought, I've been training well, I'll just set off and run a marathon in my training. In fact, I went 28 miles because I wanted to do an ultra. And this was on a 24-hour fast with no water. Rather foolish not to take any water. It was in the summer here in the UK. It was a warm one. And I just ran it. And as I'm getting back to the last 2 or 3 miles, my speed was increasing. I was coming in running at such a quick pace for the last mile or two. And I was feeling great. I was looking down at my heart rate thinking, that is in such a good place. I mean, the issue I had there was, and I don't recommend this to anybody, so please don't do an experiment like that. I should have taken water. I should have drank something. I wouldn't have needed a huge amount, but my blood volume would have been struggling. The urine was so dark. But what it did prove was that the endurance was there. And this was on a 24-hour fast. So then I started to experiment with other events. I'd been known then by this point as being a 10K specialist, a shorter distance specialist. And a few of my colleagues said, how about doing the Yorkshire Three Peaks Challenge, which is a 24-mile over 3 mountains here in the UK. And I said, I'm willing to give that a go. I'm not an off-roader runner. Then you have to take your survival pack, and they were checking to make sure everybody had eaten beforehand, because nobody can be up on the top of these peaks and run out. And I had to lie. I said, I've eaten loads. And really, I didn't have anything with me. And I completed it. No issues at all. And this has happened quite a few times. But initially, I think my speed wasn't there. Yeah, I describe it maybe as a diesel system compared to a petrol engine or something like that, whereas a diesel, or DERV as you would call it, would just keep going. And the petrol would give you the carbohydrates would be like the petrol, give you that speed. But you can get some pretty high performance diesel engines. And with training, because I could train more, because my recovery was so much quicker, that the training was better, I felt good, and my heart rate was lower, so the endurance could go. I could raise this and actually start to do it quicker. Next thing I get was an email after one of the triathlons, because I got into triathlons, was from the Great Britain team to say I'd qualified for the international, the World Championships in Pontevedra in Spain. And next thing, I'm wearing the Team GB outfit, competing, and this has happened every year. I've qualified for the Europeans, for the World Championships, year in, year out. And it's because I do not need to fuel. I don't need to stop. I don't need to take anything on board. I don't even take water for some of these events. So sorry, I keep talking there. I'll give you a chance to ask any questions.
No, it's amazing. I absolutely love that. So we have similarities in how long you and I have both been doing carnivore. The length of time is about the same, and we also have a lot of similarities on how we came across this work through endurance sports. Now, in my career, I had the benefit of using a metabolic analyzer to measure people's breathing and not only do like a VO2 max assessment test or a resting metabolic test, but as somebody was ramping up their intensity, we could figure out exactly the mixture of fat versus carbohydrate that people were burning at different intensities. And it was back in 2012 that I came across the work of a coach that was training his triathletes by feeding them a lot of fat and then teaching them to burn fat as the fuel source so that they were less reliant on carbohydrates to do endurance sports. And I was like, well, but that can't be. Like, I've been racing, road bikes and mountain bikes competitively for several years at that point, and I knew that the carbohydrates would definitely run out at some point. You had to refuel all those things. You mentioned that people, the marathoners, running to the bathroom and worse. Like, you're right. Like, the ones that made it to the bathroom were the lucky ones that got out. Yes. Okay. The other one, the way it ends for the rest of the people is not great. But it's amazing. And I got to see that validation when I would do these measurements and see that people could increase their fat burning at certain intensities from 20% to maybe 40% or 60% or 80%. And it just keeps going higher and higher. So the reliance on carbohydrates is so little. Can you go into a little bit more detail? If somebody had never heard of that before, a little bit more detail about those two energy systems. I think your engine analogy is fantastic as well. A petrol engine versus a diesel engine, but a diesel engine can also perform higher. If you're talking to an endurance athlete who's never heard of what you're talking about as far as like different fuel sources, different engines, how could you go into greater detail and explain that to somebody?
Yeah, I suppose it's not an easy one to actually explain as that, other than saying just to try it. But then even saying to try it, it would take them quite a few weeks to adapt or to notice any difference, and they probably may take a step backwards or a couple of steps backwards or feel as though they are doing. In regards to the energy system, I mean, I think how I tend to try to say to them, and this is maybe the sales point, but if many of them buy into, is that everybody has got a potential if they want to count calories. I mean, I don't like to count calories, and I put that in my book, but a lot of people know this analogy of calories. And so think about, we've potentially got 20,000 calories of fat. Even those who are slim still have that energy source to tap into. Whereas with their carbohydrates, I would say to them, how long will your carbohydrates last you? So what's the maximum time before you need to replenish in your carbohydrates? If I could get them to pinpoint that down to maybe they say, I don't know, an hour, and then they need to top up with a 20-minute worth of carbohydrates, I'll say, well, on this way of eating, on a fat burning system, you do not need that energy. You do not need to tap into that. That's there from the previous day's meal. And I think that's how I try to describe it. Just an interesting point just came to me. It was a year before last, and I read a piece, and you'll probably know this more than me, that somebody had said about you need to burn fat on a carbohydrate flame. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
Heard that phrase.
Yeah, and I thought, okay, I want to get a little bit faster. Perhaps I'll just try a few carbohydrates before a race, and maybe if that would help. Well, I did. I felt great. I was flying to start with, and then very quickly, my body did not cope very well with that. And then I've come to realize since that, all right, we do produce glucose, and that's probably the little bit of flame that they might have been implying or talking about. Oh, I'll tell you about another experiment I did with a colleague of mine. And now this guy's a carbohydrate burner. and he's won marathons here in the UK. He's a very, very good athlete, and he's the one who paid for my blood work. And he suggested once, he says, your marathon times are doing really good. Okay, I wasn't up to his standard, but they weren't bad. And he said that he thinks I could go a lot faster on carbohydrates. He says, are you willing to try this? Because he knew that I'd experimented with this way of eating as a carnivore. And I said, okay. So he said I trained my way, but the week before he wanted me to carbohydrate load. And then the morning of the marathon, he weighed how many grams per kilogram of my body weight of carbohydrates. And he brought out this bowl of porridge. And I thought there was both to share. It was before Manchester Marathon, which is a pretty big marathon here in the UK. I think it's second to London. And I said, are we sharing that? He goes, no, that's yours. I said, well, I'm not going to make him run after eating that. And he says, you need to follow this experiment. So I consumed it. I stood on the start line. It was fairly close up to the front. It was one of the front pens because of the times we were both running. And I felt so bloated. I felt really uncomfortable. We set off, and it was like a rocket fuel. I was overtaking. I was running quicker than I'd trained for, which was, as you well know, as an athlete, was a fatal mistake because I'm going to pay the price later on. But in back of my mind, I thought I'd still had that fat burning system to rely on. So if the wheels came off on this carbohydrate, then I could start burning the fat. Well, that did not happen. 16 miles in, I started to notice what my body was craving was anything that somebody could provide me. I didn't know what it was. You're trying to reach out for the jelly babies, the gels, then I needed the water because I wasn't used to training with water. And as you know, with the carbohydrates, you need equal quantities of water or probably more. So I was getting this inner thirst. Then the wheels came off, and they really came off. 20 miles in, 6 miles to go. I could hardly walk. It was a long walk back into Manchester. Yeah, it was still a good time. That's because the first 20 miles was so quick compared to my usual speed. But the worst thing for me was that feeling afterwards. I actually thought I was going to die. I thought I'd need to be hospitalized because my body was shaking. The muscles were spasming. I was in a really poor way. But for a week afterwards, I was still struggling. My muscles were aching. Whereas as a carnivore, my recovery is so quick. Within 24 hours of an event, I feel ready to train again. And then it's my choice if I train or not. Whereas that way of eating, that I couldn't go to work hardly. I could hardly walk. Something had gone from my system and the muscles. So maybe back to your original question is how I would describe it to somebody is as a sales point is that endurance, that recovery. That's what they might actually look at and say, okay, I'd be interesting to know if then I can recover quicker. And there's a lot more in it, as you well know, about then the injury prevention, because I mean, I do not struggle with any issues. I mean, I might get a slight sore muscle that I'm aware of, but within a day, that's gone. You know, this is what's incredible, and all these associated health benefits. I haven't needed any dental treatment for 7 years. I've got hair back again. I've got less grey hairs than I'd had 7 years ago. I mean, people are starting to say I look like Benjamin Button from that film, and I'm actually getting younger. And when I'm saying that I retired from teaching, because here in the UK you can retire at 55, so I'm 57 now. And they say, well, you're too young to retire. So, well, thank you. But I am generally 57 years of age. And this last couple of races, where I'd finished, I was a bit further down the field than I wanted to. I was still in the top 10, but I was being beaten by those 19, 20-year-olds who were seeking pro licenses. And I was a bit frustrated that I had lost to these guys, but I respected it, and they probably train a lot harder. Then I reminded myself, actually, I am 57. When I was their age, I would have looked at this old man beside them thinking, well, who does he think he is trying to compete against us? So I don't know. It doesn't really answer your question. I think I went off on a tangent there, but I got excited about the
No,
talking
I
about
love
it.
it. Yeah, no, I think the way you explained how the fuel runs out, like the carbohydrate fuel, you used a really key word that I want to reiterate, which is maximum. You have a maximum storage capacity of carbohydrates. Like earlier in the conversation, you mentioned carb loading. Why would you carb load the night before? Well, that would top off your carbohydrate storage. But the best you can hope for is that it reaches its limit. You can't go past that certain limit. Like if you have room for, say, 300 additional carbohydrate calories and you consume 500 calories of carbohydrates, you don't get, you only get the three that you have capacity for. Everything else will get converted into fat and stored as fat. And so, yeah, that's what you're up against, is like you've got a fuel source that you will never run out of. You have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands for a lot of people of calories of fat on the body that most people want to get rid of anyway, versus this extremely limited amount of carbohydrates that does run out. If you just teach yourself to partition the fuel in a certain way, you can use the fat and preserve all the carbohydrates and have all that endurance that you're talking about. And I had another question about that, because you mentioned you did you did the fast, that 24-hour fast, and then did the marathon. I do all of my exercise in the fasted state as well. What was it about our evolution that you learned from studying some of these different tribes, as far as like fasting, or like you said, maybe you look at a tribe in Africa and you don't necessarily notice that even though they're doing some type of endurance hunting, for example, there's not rest stations and aid stations every kilometer along the way. They're not getting those gels, like you said. We didn't evolve with that. Can you tell us what you learned about studying some of these ancient cultures and how they were able to endure, again, through fasting and through fat adaptation?
Yes, of course, and that's a really good question, and I do mention that quite a lot in the book because it is something that interested me. I think it gave me evidence that I was searching for in the early days. That I was thinking, well, if this wasn't the case with these tribes, if it wasn't the case with our ancestors, then we wouldn't be around today, because they hunted to exhaustion. That's how they coped. Man can outrun a lot of animals. There's not many that would outrun them on endurance. Okay, there's faster animals, but take an antelope, take this scene and picture yourself there in a tribal system, and they're trying to run it down with a spear. Now, they may relay this event because the one man in the heat of the day might not be able to run it down for that duration, and somebody else would pick up and maybe run. But this is what I want you to picture, that this tribal system, this tribe there that I'm trying to picture, have woken up in the morning, no food because they can't preserve the food very easily. They're hungry, they fasted since the day before. Then they need to go and hunt. Now, the onus is on them to hunt, to bring some food back for their family, for the tribe, for their loved ones. So they must get that kill, that sacred kill. And if they started to run then on a fasted state, then how could they do that? How could they fuel it to outrun this animal, to run it down to exhaustion, if they haven't eaten anything since the day before? Now, that's not just this one tribe. That's happened for ancestors around the world. Whether it's the Inuits that might be hunting, fishing, chasing the whale, the blubber off whatever animals that they're trying to capture. That it's all about that endurance that they'll needed to survive. Then what happens if they don't get that kill? If that's a bad day, they don't see anything, they go back and there's nothing left. Maybe it's a time where they had nothing available to eat. Well, then the next day they're going to have to go and hunt again. Now, we could be 2 days in here. The tribe's going to starve, the children are going to starve, the old elderly, they're going to have to do something. Now, where does this come from in the human body that allows them then to get up and then continue? Well, you and I both know, and it's called something called ketones. And this is this survival, this is this energy system. This is this beautiful, the way that your brain fires so beautifully on these ketones, because they cannot be in that situation hunting these dangerous animals that without this thought, without this beautiful, intelligent thought of self-preservation to make sure that they don't get killed by the prey that they're hunting and to set the traps. So if you're down now at 2 days of no food, you've got to think clearly. you've got to have the energy to be able to run after these. Where's that coming from? And we know where it comes from because you and I have both lived that way for almost 7 years. And we have boundless energy because of that.
Yeah, and it would be so confusing for somebody eating the standard English diet or the standard American diet to understand that. They might hear you to say all of that, that somebody is fasting longer and longer, going longer and longer without food and actually feeling better, feeling an increase in energy. Or what I was measuring using those metabolic carts is I was witnessing the metabolic rate, the number of calories being burned, actually speeding up, going higher, meaning more and more energy was available to the body in that state. But they would be so confused because they'd be saying, well, Duncan, like what you're describing, if I skip a meal or I miss a snack, I feel terrible. I'm really, really starving. My energy is very poor. It's not higher, it's much, much lower. And again, it's because you're not fueling with the right fuel to be able to get into that wonderful, magical state of ketosis.
And it is a beautiful, magical state. And unless somebody experiences it, they have no idea. It's such a fabulous feeling. So when I got selected for the Great Britain team in triathlon, I was invited to a training camp in the south of France, the Dordogne, where they were based. And it was a beautiful area to train because there's quite a lot of hills for the cycling, there's beautiful swimming, and the running around there was great as well. Well, I went along, I think it was July time. It must have been out of school, so it would have been early August. There was a heat wave. It was pretty warm. I drove down there. I took my bike with me. And then the next day, they're saying, we're going out for a training session. It'll be about a 70-mile ride in the middle of the day in this heat. And will you be okay? We've got to take the food. There's going to be a support vehicle with us. We're going to work in work all together. And as with the peloton, as you know, and they peel off. And they looked at me and said, you okay with that, Duncan? I said, no. And they said, why not? I said, I've never actually cycled I've never cycled that far before. I've never gone any further than 25 miles because that was the furthest I did was Olympic distance triathlon. And they said, okay, well, just take plenty of food with you and you'll be fine. And if you get dropped by the peloton, then there's the next group that will scoop us up, or there'll be the broom wagon that will come and the vehicle come and scoop you up. And then just before I was set off, the coach said to me, I didn't see you eating any breakfast this morning. And I lied to him, and I still feel bad about it. And I looked at him, I said, oh, yes, no, I ate in my room. And he goes, okay, well, just you make sure you have plenty with you, because if you bonk out there, when you're going to be dropped, we're not going to be very happy about it. And I looked at him, I said, I'll be fine. Don't you worry. And they were all taking the drinks bottles, and there was plenty of this electrolytes. And it was, when I looked at it, it was all full of glucose. And they were filling up the water bottles and then giving them to the car with a name on to be handed those as they were going along. And I just had 2 bottles of salty water, just slightly salty with my own electrolytes that I tend to use. And I put those in there. And as we're going along through this day, I saw plenty of these colleagues getting dropped and they're struggling. And everybody's taking the stint on the front. And as it's getting hotter and it's getting harder, your stint on the front was getting shorter and shorter, each of the riders. So as I'm getting closer to the front, I thought, well, he'd already lasted 10 seconds before he peeled off. By the time we got to about 50 miles, they were struggling. We had 20 miles to get back. I pulled at the front, the 20 miles back in on my own, sitting at the front of them. So wow. The coach came up across to me. He goes, "Wow, what a beast, Doug! Wow, where did you said to me you've never gone that far before?" I said, "Well, I hadn't. I couldn't tell them because I'd lied about the food early on. But I know where that energy system came from. I know what was going on, and because there's another point as well, and you'll know this as an athlete, as a cyclist, is that our heart rate tends to operate lower. Our resting heart rate is lower." So I can sit there in that zone 2 area indefinitely. It's only until my muscles really give up with fatigue that I don't feel as though I ever get run out of energy in that zone 2. If I start pushing it higher, yeah, I've got to be aware of that. And perhaps when I'm going really quick for, say, for a 25-mile, and I am going full tilt, yeah, I might start to feel the cramp. I might start to feel the tightness in the calves or the quads, but you tend to focus on the other leg, don't you? And you tend to, until it goes away. maybe perhaps it's just down to training, is that? So
Wow. That's amazing. For the people who are listening or watching and are unfamiliar with the sport, what Duncan's describing is a monster move in cycling. Next time you see a bike race, you see it on TV, pay attention because you'll see the first person working so hard to ride at a certain speed. And then if you just look at a few cyclists back behind him, these cyclists are almost coasting. They're barely even pedaling at all, and they're doing the exact same speed. That's how drastic the effect of drafting is in the sport of cycling, especially the higher and higher speeds they go. And so when you hear Duncan say that he was able to take a pole at high speed for over an hour, that's a monster effort. So yeah, I wanted people to really appreciate what kind of work you were doing at that stage in the race, that the effect of drafting is so much. To hear you at the very end do such a monster pull at the end, I just wanted to make sure we reiterated what an amazing
no,
feat that is.
oh no, thank you for that as well. But it's, I mean, okay, everybody's different, and maybe that you could think, and anybody would look at it and think, okay, this is what maybe Duncan is. Maybe he's a beast. Maybe I can dig deeper than others, but I don't think I can. I am aware of athletes who are willing to go into that pain zone, but I don't like it. I would rather sit outside that pain zone. And I think this way of eating, this lifestyle that I live on now, I can sit at a comfortable 150 beats per minute if I'm pushing, that's my race pace. And it feels good. Yeah, okay, occasionally let it, if I was going to sit back into the peloton and let it drop down again, I will find that my heart rate now is very, very responsive, very quick. If I demand something from it, it will shoot up there. And then if I give it, I can watch that on my cycling computer in front of me. So easy. And it's a nice way to be, because I feel so in tune with that heart. I feel at one with it. And when I'm lying there at rest, and I sit in the sauna a lot, and I can feel my own heartbeat, and it's so reassuring. It's a beautiful feeling. I can almost hear it, and it's when you get down to almost 2 seconds between beats, and you're thinking that's like very steady. And when I've been in teaching, because I'll always wear my watch on my wrist there, and then in the classroom, if the students the behavior started to be going down, I said, "Whoa, guys, can you stop this behavior? Because my heart rate's now gone up to about 45 beats now. so you'll have to calm down a bit." "Oh, sorry, sir, sorry." And it's like, that's that's something I really want to discuss as well with you. With being in education, I coincided the release of my book when I retired from teaching, because I really tear apart the food pyramid and the so-called healthy plate. And while I was working in education, I would have to deliver that during tutor times, during some of these other lessons, and I would have to tell them about our educational system's viewpoint on the so-called healthy plate and this food pyramid. And then the students would be saying, "Sir, I want to look like you. What do you eat?" And I could not tell them, because I got pulled into the head's office at one point, having my knuckles wrapped, because they would get complaints from parents. Can you imagine the parents ringing and saying they idolize this teacher that doesn't eat any fruit and vegetables? So it's something I had to keep quiet. However, there was half a dozen teachers there that were vegans, and they would, in their lessons, deliver their veganism, and they were never told off for this. It was almost as though they were allowed to discuss the health benefits from being a vegan. They were actually applauded for being a vegan or a vegetarian, whereas me as a carnivore, I was demonized if I dared say anything. And I really have to keep this quiet. And back to the athletes, my colleagues now, they still look at me as though I'm a strange being. Many of them will ask me and say, "What's your secret? What have I got to do to be as fast as you, or to do?" And I said, "I can tell you, but you won't want to know." They said, "Oh, please tell me." I said, "I will try, but you seriously won't want to know." I said, "Okay, first things first, cut out wheat. Just take wheat out of your diet." And they go, "I can do that." I said, "All right, maybe you can." "Yeah, I can cut out bread." "Maybe you can, but wheat is in your pasta. It's a filling. It's a filler in most of your processed foods. It's everything you look at. Everything is wheat." And they go, "Oh, I can't do that." I said, "Okay, I did warn you." "I'll cut out sugar." "Oh, I can't cut out sugar." "Okay, again, it's something you can't do." but you wanted to know what the secret is, and it's not nothing. It's not a secret, is it? It's something that our ancestors have known. We wouldn't be around today, would we, as humankind?
Yep, exactly. Well said. I love that. I'm glad you brought up the book. I really wanted to talk about what that process was like. How did you decide you wanted to write a book? And also, again, you've got a certain style of writing, but you also you use a caricature, which I really like. So can you tell us about how you formulated your thinking around the book, why you decided to write it, and how the vampire relates to everything?
Yes, and it does come a little strange, and I think this is people have sent me lots of messages saying, "Well, is it fiction?" I said, "Definitely not fiction. It's science based." But I'll explain all that. So over the last year, maybe a little bit longer, people have started to plant the seed and saying, "Oh, we should write a book," as we often get told. Especially, I went from fat man to world athlete. So that's I thought about. But really, it's this story, this message about this way of living, the carnivore way of living that I wanted to get across. So if I was going to spend a time writing a book, it would be talking about this. So about a year ago, I started to look at my research, and you start to get all the notes, and I've got files and files of it, and starting to pull all this together and thinking, yes, I'll do this. I'll start writing this book. And then the more times that I spoke to people and they asked me what I ate, and they were hungry, or they were saying, "Oh, it's always that problem of especially if you're racing, is when do you eat? Do you eat 2 hours before? Do you eat an hour? Or you come back from work and there'd be an evening race, because we have Tuesday night bike races here in the UK, time trials, and they would be struggling to get the food beforehand, and they say, "Oh, I didn't eat since lunchtime." I said, "Don't worry, I haven't eaten since yesterday." So when I started to talk to them, they look at me as though I'm some sort of strange creature, as though as a mythical, as though I'm not real, because they cannot get their head around how you can race on a 24-hour fast. So you can imagine me there on an evening with my book and my research and every bit I find of information. I'm thinking, wow, that's so interesting. And then next day I'll be racing and people are saying they don't believe me again. And I smiled one night to myself. I don't know why it came to me. And I thought, what happens if I told this story through the eyes of a mythical creature? Because they believe I'm mythical anyway. They don't believe that it's possible. Are they more likely to believe through the eyes of this mythical creature? Then, I don't know if I'd been watching some film. It might have been a vampire film or something like that. And I thought, do you know what? These vampires, they're healthy. They don't need to eat for days. They're so fast. There were so many similarities, apart from, of course, the blood sucking. But I thought, well, what happens if maybe that is just a fallacy anyway? Maybe the vampires of the old were actually the carnivores, and modern everybody else is the what would you call them? The farmers, the working on wheat and crops and the likes. Perhaps maybe that's what. So I thought, let's tell this story. But the bigger picture, really, about the vampire was because I touch on some really difficult topics in there. There's a chapter about cancer, and there's a chapter about the so-called wonder diet drugs that are causing so many problems. I'm touching on quite a few things, that even autism, a lot of these neurodiversity problems for the children that I saw in school. And if I'm telling this story through the eyes of a mythical creature, then it's a little bit easier to be able to hide behind that. And so then my voice could be louder without it just being Duncan Smart, the maths teacher. But as you read through the book, as it evolves, it's obviously me. And then if you've read to the very end, then that vampire is also you. It's also the reader. Because once you've traveled that journey and it's opened that door to this way of living, then there's no going back. It's such a beauty. If you're willing to step through and they're willing to try it and they're willing to give it a go, then it is a beautiful way of eating, beautiful way of living. So that's really where the vampire came from. Now, when I've been doing these podcasts, and I realized that I missed a little bit of a trick, because having the title Blood and Bone, The Vampire's Guide to Carnivore Living, there's no wonder people think it's a bit of fiction. It's a fictional book. And if I want to get this message across to everybody about this way of living, then maybe I needed to repackage it. So the second book is Carnivore, the Manual, but it's the same content. It's just a reduced version. It's not so much of a manifesto. It's more of a manual, a handbook, really. So it's the same content. And I was even going to repackage it without the vampire. And then I thought, no, the vampire is the story in there. The vampire is important because, as I say, I can touch on stuff that's quite difficult subjects to be to talk about. We get shot down for trying to mention anything like that this way, with Warburg effect with the cancer cells. And it's so, again, I could hide behind that vampire. So.
Well, I like the concept quite a bit. And I like that you did separate out the two books, one being more the manifesto side of things, the other the more practical, direct, to the point, kind of shorter. In that one, I believe you start out by addressing a few myths. Maybe you could talk about some of the myths that you address through really both of the books, but in particular, the kind of field guide manual book.
Yeah, the myths, I mean, that became a bigger and longer chapter as I was writing. And each time there was going to be another myth. I mean, originally I was going to put 13 myths in there. I called them lies to start with. And then I thought, well, following the theme of the book, a myths would sound better. But it's the myths that we've been sold, the narrative that we've been told, that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So I wanted to address that as a myth and say, well, where did that come from? Has anybody actually thought? And I get told that all the time in education. The head teacher will say to me, Mr. Smart, make sure those children have their meal because they haven't been fed at home. I said, well, that's fine. They'll be okay. They said, oh no, give them some cereal, give them some bagels, give them croissants, give them all. And it makes me shudder that would be the idea. So it was to address this myth, the Kellogg's myth of where it came from. And it's all about money, really. So I addressed that. And cholesterol. I mean, that's the number one for me. Everybody tells me, I get messages. There's not many mornings I wake up that I don't have a message on social media to say that I will die from a painful heart attack eating all this cholesterol. And that's one of the biggest myths we've been sold, thanks to Ansel Keys and his infamous 7-country study, which was 22 countries. And as a mathematician, it actually still makes the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, because you cannot remove data. You cannot cherry pick the data that fits your own hypothesis, your own narrative. That goes against everything. You need to include all the data. Even if it's not telling us something, it's still telling us something, and I think he is responsible indirectly for so many deaths and uncomfortable lives from this information. So that was a big one to be addressed as one of the myths. And of course, the myths about that you need to eat 3 meals a day. Well, you don't. And the myths about salt being bad for you. Everything you could possibly think of that we've been sold over the years, that seed oils, vegetable oils, I mean, I just despair.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about two more. One, then both of them came up in this conversation I had this weekend. One was the seed oils, vegetable oils that people thought were healthy for them, which you just mentioned. And the other one I get questions about all the time is fiber. Well, how are you able to have a healthy gut and healthy digestion without the fiber?
Yeah, and again, in the UK, I think people don't like discussing that. They don't even want to say this. They don't even want to say about going to the toilet. It's a strange one. And I remember sitting in the staff room when somebody came in and they said, what about your fiber? And I said, why do you need fiber? They said, well, to make sure you're okay down there. And I said, when you say down there, what do you mean? Just say it. And I said, no. I said, far, far from it. I said, you'll need the fiber because you're a carb burner, because you eat all these carbohydrates, that you'll need that fiber. But really, you are going to attach so many beautiful minerals and important nutrients to that fiber and deprive your body of it. just and then they'll suffer with their IBS and all that related. And you do not realize that you do not need any fiber. Okay, I actually it took me probably took me several months because I probably went through this constipation stage. I was trying to get it right, and I was probably not. Maybe it might have been not enough fat. It might not have been enough salt. It was all trial and error in those days. But now my system is so beautiful. Absolutely, I could tell if I've eaten something maybe that we went out for a meal, my partner and I, a few weeks ago, and it was a celebration. It was one of these awkward ones where you still have to go, but we went to this Brazilian meat restaurant where they bring the meat out and you just have as much as you want. And I was told that it was cooked in butter. There's no way it's cooked in butter. I mean, it's it's you could almost taste the seed oils or whatever they've done or the marinade. Now, the next day, I can always tell if there's something because when you go to the toilet and you wipe and then there's residue. When I go now as a carnivore, there is no residue on that paper. There's nothing. How clean that is. And it's incredible. It's such a nice feeling. Now, if that's just on the surface, then surely on the inside as well, that's got to be better. And that's with no fiber whatsoever.
Yep. It still blows my mind that if you Google search what is the best diet for digestive issues, and you can name whatever digestive issue, IBS, IBD, colitis, all these kinds of things, the number one diet that's recommended is a low fiber or a no fiber diet. You do better with digestive issues by eliminating the fiber. Yet everybody just so ubiquitously knows that more fiber is always good for you. And yeah, just stuffing more and more fiber in the system is definitely not going to help things out.
I remember, oh gosh, a few years ago, my ex-partner, and she was into triathlon with me, and we wanted to train for Ironman events, and this was on the tables, and we went for traveling to one of these events, and then she said, oh, this is quite early on actually, this is just before, but she was going, oh, I've just got a bit of a discomfort, a bit of bloating. And I said, are you okay? Is it stomach ache? Because she goes, oh no, it often happens. A lot of women get that. She goes, but if I get some bread, I'll be fine. And I think we're in France at the time, so she had some French bread and she felt really good. And I said, while we're traveling, can you just do an experiment for me and just cut out wheat completely? Cut it out. Don't try. And she said, oh, I don't want to turn carnivore like you. I said, you don't have to. Just cut out that wheat. Because every time she was feeling uncomfortable, she ate more bread. She ate more wholemeal bread, all these, because she says, oh, it made her feel better. Well, I know it didn't. And I could also identify that she was deprived of of nutrients. She was almost suffering malnutrition, even though she was eating plenty. And I think we needed to heal her gut first, but I couldn't come out directly and say that. And so she tried it. Within a week, she says, I feel so good. This is no wheat. What have I got to do next? And she was hungry for it. And then she went on to do Ironman events. Now, an Ironman, to your listener, will be almost a 3-mile swim and then a 112-mile bike, and then you run a marathon off the back of it. And so when she went to do this event, and I cooked her a beautiful meal the night before, lots of fatty meats, and I said, you are going to do this fasted. You are going to do this, the whole Ironman. And I will pack you a little bit of emergency food. So it was some salted belly pork that was a little bit fat, and it was just in a little emergency packet there on a crossbar on a bike. But she never needed it. And she went on to do Ironman since, full Ironman events as a carnivore. And what she realized was as soon as she healed her gut, then she started to grow muscle. And she was always taking iron tablets before. She was suffering with iron. She was eating those so-called iron-rich foods. As soon as she got carnivore, no need for that anymore. Her iron levels were superb. And
that's great.
And she's still racing to this day. We're not together, but she's there enjoying the eventing.
Amazing. It's so cool how consistently you hear that same story. That's wonderful. Duncan, is there anything else you'd like us to know about your books?
Yeah, I think read it. If anybody gets hold of a copy of this book, and look at the Carnivore the manual, because it's a smaller book to read. You can get it as an ebook and go through the entire book, read it all the way through, and listen. And you do not need to take much of it in. But what you'll realize is there's more written between the lines than actually in the lines themselves. Once you've finished it and you sit back, and then you can dip into any chapter. Each chapter is written purposely to be standalone, to be a standalone chapter, whether you want to look at healing your gut, whether you want to look at menopause, because there's a whole chapter about menopause in there. There's a chapter about neurodiversity. If it was a parent looking at maybe with the children to see how they could improve with the ADHD, then that's a standalone chapter. But if you read it all the way from the start to the finish, to the end, there's that actually underlying message. And the message is, it's really my life. It's, I am that vampire that's evolving through, and it comes out to be me at the end. But I've just somehow got to get people to read it. Okay, I make a few pounds. It's not as much as people think on each book sale, and that would be very nice. Thank you very much. But it's about getting that message, and it's my way of communicating it. And then on the back of it, of releasing this book, I've getting invited onto podcasts and getting to meet these brilliant people like yourself, and I get the opportunity to be able to tell my story.
Well, yeah, I really hope people pick it up. I'm definitely going to get myself a copy. And yeah, if nothing else, I'd like that you stayed true to your style and your way of communicating that is unique and different and will really stand out and will really help a lot of people out there. Duncan, I've just really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and I've enjoyed getting to know you. Hopefully, the two of us one day can go share a steak and go on a great bike ride or something together. Would be a lot of fun. But for now, where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work, and where can people go to grab the books?
Okay, I am all over social media. Look under Duncan Smart. It's a pretty distinctive name. There won't be many out there. And I also go under the Carnivore Guide. I set off as a Carnivore Vampire, and that's still out there. But it's, again, I thought people are looking at the vampire and thinking it was something else. So the Carnivore Guide. You'll find me on TikTok, on Instagram, and on Facebook. I'm not doing much on YouTube. I haven't really done a lot there, but you will certainly find me on those social media platforms.
Excellent. We will link those up. And then are the books just available anywhere books are sold? I know I was able to find it on Amazon very easily.
Yeah, very easily on Amazon. And I also through all the other Waterstones. They don't stock them in the shops there, but they are available in print, in hardback, softback. So they are in most of the outlets, yes.
Great. And for the listener, for the reader, as we always say, ratings and reviews really, really help. They help us with our podcast. They help Duncan with books. And anybody you read, if you enjoy their work, please just go and leave a message, leave a review and a rating. It really, really helps people out. I think more people need to remember that. A lot of people out there like yourself doing amazing work, and the ratings and reviews really help. Duncan, for now, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your busy day to come chat with us today. This was a really fun conversation. There's a lot of really good practical information that I think will help a lot of people. So thank you so very much for stopping by today, and all the best with the book. I hope it reaches a lot of lives out there.
Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed it. Love the discussion. Thank you.
This is a great chat. I really, really appreciated it. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.